Welcome back to the deep dive. We've got a really fascinating stack of materials to get through today. I want to start with a question, and I want you to be honest with me. When you hear the word abracadabra, what is the first thing that pops into your head?
Honestly, a rabbit in a hat. Yeah, maybe a kid's birthday party. A magician in a cheap tuxedo waving a plastic wand. It's the ultimate cliche of stage magic.
Right, it's the stuff of childhood games. You grab a stick in the backyard, you put on a towel for a cape, and you shout it out. It's synonymous with fake magic.
Huh.
But what if I told you that word isn't nonsense? What if it's not just gibberish invented for entertainment, but is actually one of the most profound, ancient theological statements in human history?
I would say you are setting the bar pretty high for a Monday morning.
I am, but that is exactly where our source material today takes us. We are doing a deep dive into a lecture by a researcher named Roy Potter, and this isn't your typical academic paper or uh, a polished TED Talk. This is something grittier. We're looking at a video presentation where he is connecting dots that, according to mainstream history, should not be connected.
It's a really unique source. Potter is fascinating because he isn't presenting this from an ivory tower. He's very open about his situation. He's recording this on video, admitting he's playing catch up with the technology. He's dealing with some heavy personal tragedy, but he has this burning, almost desperate need to share what he calls the hidden and dark places of history.
And the scope of what he covers is massive. He starts with linguistics, breaking down words like abracadabra, and ends up reconstructing the entire relationship between ancient Egypt and the Hebrew Bible. And if that wasn't enough, he pivots into a fierce political critique of modern power structures.
It is a wild ride. He's essentially arguing that the history of religion, specifically the connection between the Egyptians and the Hebrews, has been deliberately obscured. He believes there's a priestcraft, a system of control, that has been hiding a unifying truth for thousands of years.
Priestcraft, that is a loaded term. We're going to unpack that fully because it seems to be the lens through which he views everything from ancient pyramids to modern geopolitics. But before we get to the global conspiracy stuff, let's ground this. Who is Roy Potter? What's the context here? Because the vibe of this lecture is very specific.
It is, and I think the context is crucial for the listener to understand why he's saying what he's saying. Potter opens the lecture by being incredibly vulnerable. He has a photo behind him of his late wife, Carol. She passed away in 2008 from cancer.
It's a touching tribute. He explicitly says he wouldn't be doing this research if it wasn't for her.
Right. He describes himself as having been non-traditional, maybe a bit of a wanderer in his interests, but she was the one who encouraged him. He says a wife enters the life of her husband and takes part in it. She pushed him to look into these dark places, these alternative histories. So right off the bat, you realize this isn't a man protecting a tenure track or trying to sell a book. He's a widower, driven by promise. He's on a personal quest for truth, and he doesn't care if that truth upsets the establishment.
He actually seems to relish upsetting the establishment. He makes it clear early on that he doesn't trust professionals.
Oh, he's very skeptical of authority. Whether it's archaeologists, biblical scholars, or ecclesiastical leaders, he views consensus as suspect. He argues that just because a group of experts agree on a narrative, that doesn't make it true. In fact, he suggests that consensus is often a tool of control. He compares it to recent global events where narratives are enforced and dissent is punished.
Which brings us back to that word, priestcraft.
Hmm.
When I hear that, I think of maybe corruption in the medieval church, selling indulgences, that kind of thing. But Potter goes back much further. He brings up a scene from the movie Apocalypto.
It's a vivid example to use. If you haven't seen the movie, there's this harrowing scene where the Mayan high priests are atop this massive pyramid. Below them are thousands of common people, terrified, waiting for a sign. The priests know an eclipse is coming. They have the astronomical charts. They've done the math. They possess the data. The people down below do not.
So the priests use that information gap as a weapon.
Exactly. They pretend the gods are angry. They demand sacrifices, blood sacrifices. And then when the sun returns, which the priests knew it would do regardless of the sacrifice, they claim credit. They say, "See, we appeased the gods. We saved you." Potter points to this and says, that is priestcraft.
It's the hoarding of knowledge to manufacture consent and control.
It's using fear, driven by a lack of knowledge among the masses, to extract power and wealth. And Potter's argument is that this isn't just a Mayan thing. He argues this dynamic exists in every institutional religion: Catholicism, Judaism, Protestantism. He says priests hoard the spiritual keys to control the flock.
He even gives a warning: beware of the priests. It sounds almost like a survivalist warning.
It is a warning. He argues that the most dangerous people are those who believe they are doing God's will or those who claim to speak for God because they can justify any atrocity, any sacrifice as a divine mandate. This concept of sacrifice versus knowledge is going to come up again and again in his lecture. He wants to strip away that layer of priestcraft to get back to what he sees as the original source code of the relationship between man and God.
Okay, let's look at that source code. This is where he puts on his linguist hat. We started with abracadabra. I need you to walk me through this. How does he get from a magician's catchphrase to the book of Genesis?
It's a fascinating breakdown. Potter claims that abracadabra is pure Hebrew. He dissects it into three distinct parts: Abra, Kaha, and Dabra.
Okay, let's take them one by one. Abra.
Abra comes from the Hebrew root for to create. The Aleph at the beginning, the first letter of the alphabet, makes it first person. So I create.
Ka.
Ka is a preposition meaning as or like.
And Dabra.
Dabra comes from davar, which means word or speech. So when you string it together, abracadabra, I create as I speak, or I create according to my word.
That's literally the mechanism of creation in the Bible. And God said, let there be light, and there was light.
Precisely. Potter argues that this magic word is actually a theological memory of the creative power of the divine voice. It's a statement that speech, the word, is the engine of reality. And he uses this to show the profound Hebrew concepts are hiding in plain sight, even in our trivial entertainment.
It changes the way you look at a children's party, that's for sure. But he doesn't stop there. He applies this same Hebrew decoding ring to ancient Egypt. Now, this is where things get controversial for historians. He brings up the Papyrus of Ani.
Right. If you take an Art History 101 class, you know the Papyrus of Ani is the most famous, best preserved version of the Egyptian Book of the Dead. It's a beautiful scroll filled with hieroglyphs and illustrations.
And the standard story is that Ani was just a guy, a scribe in Thebes, who paid to have this scroll made so he could navigate the afterlife.
That is the mainstream Egyptological view. Ani was a specific person, a historical figure. Potter looks at that and says, no, he looks at the word Ani and reads it as Hebrew.
So if we treat Ani as a Hebrew word, what does it mean?
It's spelled Aleph Nun Yod. In Hebrew, Ani simply translates to I am.
I am. That is not just a pronoun. That is a heavy theological title.
It's the ultimate title. When Moses asks God at the burning bush, who shall I say sent me? God replies, I am that I am. So Potter is flipping the script on this famous Egyptian document. He's suggesting that the Papyrus of Ani isn't a biography of a dead scribe named Ani. It is a guidebook for the I am, for the soul, or perhaps for the divine spark within every person, to return to the Creator.
That is a massive shift in perspective. It turns a historical artifact into a universal spiritual manual.
And it suggests that the Egyptians and the Hebrews were dealing with the exact same concepts, using the exact same language, long before historians say they should have been.
He backs this up with another famous name, Imhotep. Usually we think of the architect of the Step Pyramid or maybe the bald villain in the Mummy movies.
Right. Imhotep is a titan of Egyptian history. Potter references work by researcher Trey Smith here. He breaks down the name Imhotep and relates to I am or the I am. And Hotep usually translates to peace, offering, or satisfaction. But in this context, Potter links it to voice or spokesman.
So what is the full title?
The voice of the I am, or I speak for the I am.
So Imhotep isn't just a name, it's a job description.
Exactly. He is the spokesman for God. Potter even points to the hieroglyphs used to write it. He shows an owl and a feather. In Egyptian, those symbols are phonetically linked to I am or my. He argues that if you look at the linguistics and the symbols, you see that before the Tower of Babel, when the Bible says the whole world had one speech, Egyptian theology and Hebrew theology were one and the same.
The implication here is staggering. He's saying that the division between these religions, Egypt as the pagan bad guys, Israel as the monotheistic good guys, is artificial. It's a later invention.
That is his core thesis. He believes that if you go back far enough to the early dynasties, you find the same truth. The priestcraft, the later religious authorities, are the ones who created the division, who called one side pagan and the other holy to maintain their own power bases. But Potter thinks the original truth is still sitting there, frozen in the hieroglyphs, waiting to be read.
If we are talking about original truth, we have to talk about the nature of God. Potter spends a lot of time on the Tetragrammaton, the four-letter name of God, YHWH, usually pronounced Yahweh or Jehovah. Now, I grew up thinking of God as a him, a father. Potter has a very different take on this.
He does, and he admits this is where he loses a lot of traditional religious people. He approaches the name YHWH not just as a word, but as a formula or a diagram. He breaks down the four letters. Yod, Hey, Vav, Hey.
Let's walk through them. This is visual, so help
Yeah.
us see it.
Okay, the first letter is Yod. It looks like a small arm or hand. Potter identifies this strictly as the masculine aspect, the father, the male.
Okay.
The second letter is Hey. Potter identifies this as the feminine, the mother, the female.
So right there in the first two letters of God's name, you have a gender balance, male and female.
Correct. Then you have the third letter, Vav. In Hebrew grammar, Vav acts as a connector. It means and. It's shaped like a hook or a nail. It binds things together.
And the final letter.
It's Hey again, the female.
So, male, female, connector, female. What does Potter say that adds up to?
He argues that the name of God, the very definition of the divine existence, is a family unit. It is a male and a female connected to another female, which represents posterity, offspring, or creation. He says God is composed of man and woman. He says the I am is a family.
That is a radical departure from the bearded man in the sky archetype.
It is. Potter is very blunt about it. He says, I know this upsets the traditional narrative, but he argues that creation itself reflects this. You need male and female to create life. If God is the ultimate creator, the ultimate I am, then God must encompass both principles.
He doesn't just rely on the Hebrew letters, though. He claims this exact theology is encoded visually in Egyptian art. He holds these diagrams as something called a hypocephalus. Now, I had to look this up. It's a disc they put under the head of a mummy, right?
That's right. It's a ritual object meant to keep the deceased warm and distinct in the afterlife. It's covered in dense imagery. But Potter zooms in on a specific panel. He describes a scene that he claims depicts the Garden of Eden.
The Garden of Eden on an Egyptian mummy disc.
That's his claim. He points out a figure of a serpent. He links this to the Nachash, the serpent in Genesis. Then he points to a man sitting on a throne. And then, this is the key, he describes an eye being passed to a woman.
An eye being passed, what does that signify?
He connects this back to the Hebrew letter Hey. He says Hey pictographically represents a window. What do you do with a window? You look through it. It involves vision. He links this to the concept of Hava, or Eve, whose name is related to living and breathing, but also to this idea of perception.
So the eye represents knowledge or perception being given to the woman.
Exactly. He describes the eye moving from the man to the woman and then the woman goading the bull to action. He interprets this as the moment of activation, the spark of creation. He sees the story of Adam and Eve not as a fall from grace, but as a necessary process of creation, depicted right there in Egyptian theology. He's essentially reading the Egyptian art as a storyboard for the name YHWH.
It's incredible how he synthesizes this. He's looking at a picture that an Egyptologist would say represents, say, the cow goddess Hathor and the sun god Ra. And he's saying, no, that is the Tetragrammaton. That is the story of Jehovah.
And he doubles down on this when he gets to the famous Court of Osiris scene. This is the climax of the Papyrus of Ani.
Paint the picture for us. This is the Judgment Day scene.
Right. The soul of Ani has passed through the wilderness. He arrives at the final throne room. Sitting on the throne is a figure. Green skin, wrapped in white linen, holding the crook and flail symbols of authority. Mainstream Egyptology says, that is Osiris, the lord of the underworld.
And Potter says.
Potter says, that is a representation of YHWH. That is the Hebrew god.
Why would he think that? I mean, the green skin alone seems pretty distinctively Egyptian.
He looks past the skin color to the composition of the scene. He turns to the figure standing behind the throne. There are two women standing behind this seated male figure, usually identified as Isis and Nephthys. Potter says, look at the geometry. You have the male on the throne. You have the two females connected to him. It mirrors his breakdown of the Tetragrammaton. Yod, male, plus Hey, female, plus Hey, female. He argues this is a visual representation of the same family of God concept.
So he's saying the Egyptians knew the God of the Hebrews. They just drew him differently.
He's saying they are the same entity. He argues that the Egyptian religion in its earliest, purest form was about the same loving kindness and heart-based judgment that the original Hebrew prophets talked about. He thinks the division is a result of later corruptions.
This leads us to the weighing of the heart. This is probably the most iconic image from ancient Egypt. You have a scale. On one side, a jar containing the heart of the deceased. On the other side, a feather.
Right. The feather of Ma, truth, order, cosmic balance. Potter interprets the feather as the symbol of the I am, the standard of purity. The test is simple. Is your heart lighter than the feather?
I loved his interpretation here. He says, the heart represents the condition of your mind and spirit. It's not about how many rituals you performed or how much money you gave to the temple. It's about guile.
Yes, guile. Is there deceit in your heart? Is there heavy emotional baggage? is their hatred. Potter links this directly to the Bible. He quotes the verse where God says he will write his law on their hearts.
That's Jeremiah,
It's
right?
Jeremiah 31.
Yeah.
I will put my law in their inward parts and write it in their hearts. Potter sees the weighing of the heart seen as the visual version of that verse. The true religion, as he called it, isn't about the building you stand in or the clothes the priest wears. It's about the density of your heart.
Which brings us to the most controversial part of his lecture, because if true religion is about the heart, then a lot of organized religion is in big trouble. Potter doesn't just stay in ancient history. He looks at the news. He looks at modern Israel. He looks at the church. And he has some very, very strong critiques.
We really need to navigate this carefully because Potter pulls no punches here. We are reporting his specific viewpoint, and it is a viewpoint that challenges the foundational narratives of both modern Judaism and Christianity. Potter argues that the modern state of Israel and the religious leadership, specifically the Levitical priesthood or Cohens, are operating under priestcraft, not divine will.
He uses some extremely harsh terminology. He brings up something called the Hannibal Directive.
He does. The Hannibal Directive is a controversial, alleged military doctrine of the Israel Defense Forces. The idea is that an army might risk the life of a captured soldier, or even sacrifice them, to prevent them from falling into enemy hands and becoming a bargaining chip. Potter brings this up to make a broader point about leadership.
And he connects this to the word Holocaust. This was a linguistic shock to me. I always thought Holocaust just meant great destruction.
Potter goes back to the etymology. And the word Holocaust comes from the Greek holocauston, which translates a Hebrew concept of a whole burnt offering, a sacrifice entirely consumed by fire on the altar.
So when Potter puts those two things together, the Hannibal Directive and the burnt offering, what is he arguing?
He argues, quite controversially, that leadership groups throughout history, and he points to modern examples, are willing to sacrifice their own people, like a burnt offering, to maintain power. He says they are sacrificing their own for the benefit of the power group.
That is a chilling thought, that the shepherds are feeding on the flock.
Exactly. He asserts that this is the ultimate form of priestcraft, using the lives of the people to feed the power of the priests. And he argues that this is diametrically opposed to what God actually wants. He brings the receipts from the Bible to back this up. He quotes Jeremiah, Amos, and Hosea.
And these aren't the warm and fuzzy verses you get on a greeting card. These are the scorched earth verses.
They are. He quotes Jeremiah 7, where God says, I will cast you out of my sight as I have cast out all your brethren, even the whole seed of Ephraim. He's talking about how God rejected the temple at Shiloh because of corruption. Potter is warning that the same thing applies to modern institutions. Just because you have the temple or the land or the title doesn't mean God is with you.
And the Amos quote is even stronger. I despise your feast days.
That is Amos chapter 5. It's a powerful passage. God says, Take thou away from me the noise of thy songs, but let judgment run down as waters and righteousness as a mighty stream. Potter uses this to argue that God never wanted the sacrifices. He never wanted the rituals, the incense, the burnt offerings. He wanted justice and mercy.
He's basically saying that the entire system of temple sacrifice, which is central to so much of the Old Testament narrative, was a corruption. It was priestcraft inserted by men, not requested by God.
He even quotes the Gospel of the Ebionites to support this. It's an ancient apocryphal text. In it, Jesus is quoted as saying, I have come to abolish sacrifices. Potter uses this to reinforce his point. The blood and thunder religion, the religion that requires killing, whether it's animals in a temple or enemies in a war, is a corruption of the original intent.
He specifically mentions the Amalek narrative. This is relevant because we hear this in modern political discourse. Politicians will call an enemy Amalek.
Right. In the Bible, Amalek was the archenemy of Israel, and the command was to wipe them out completely. Potter argues that modern leaders use this label to dehumanize their enemies and justify land seizure and war. He calls it a manipulation. He basically says, you're calling them Amalek so you can take their land and feel righteous about it, but God is looking at your heart, not your label.
It's an intense critique. He's essentially saying that the people claiming to be the chosen ones, whether in religious leadership or political power, are actually failing the weighing of the heart test.
Yes. He says they are operating by the God of this world. And this is a crucial theological distinction he makes.
Let's unpack that. The God of this world, who is that?
In Potter's view, there is a sharp distinction between the Creator, the I Am, the God of loving kindness, and the entity that runs the systems of power, money, and control on earth. He often associates this God of this world with the corruption of the priesthoods.
So when people worship power or when they kill in the name of God, they aren't worshiping the creator.
Exactly. He suggests they are worshiping the system, the god of this world. He even hints that the figure worshipped in many institutional churches might be this imposter god, a god of rules, control, and tithes, rather than the god of the heart.
That is a terrifying thought for a believer, that you might be in church every Sunday believing you are devout, but you're actually worshiping the wrong management.
It is the ultimate conspiracy theory, in a way, that the spiritual lines of communication have been hijacked, that the priestcraft has inserted a middleman who takes the worship and gives back fear.
And this leads to his final warning to the listener. He tells everyone to be situationally aware.
He sounds almost like a survivalist here. Eyes on the horizon, ears to the ground. He warns against trusting official narratives from Washington, D.C., London, or religious leaders. He says, don't borrow trouble, meaning don't go looking for a fight, but be prepared.
But his preparation isn't about buying gold or building a bunker, is it?
No. It's about spiritual preparation, getting your heart right. Because in his view, the destruction that happened in 70 A.D. when the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed by the Romans is a pattern. It's a cycle. He believes that same destruction is coming again for modern systems because they have fallen into the same trap of priestcraft.
He believes history repeats itself because the same spiritual errors are being made.
Precisely. The hoarding of power leads to collapse. It's a universal law to him. And his advice is to step out of that system, look inward, and connect directly with the I Am.
It's a lot to take in. We started with a magic word from a kid's birthday party and ended up dismantling the entire geopolitical religious complex.
It really shows the power of Potter's approach. He pulls a thread, a single word like abracadabra or ani, and he just keeps pulling until he unravels the whole tapestry of accepted history.
So let's try to synthesize this for the listener. What is the big takeaway here? If someone isn't an expert in hieroglyphs or Hebrew, why does this matter?
I think the takeaway is that history is written by the victors, and that includes religious history. Potter is suggesting that a profound, unifying spiritual truth, that God is a creative family, that worship is about the heart, that humanity was once one speech, has been deliberately obscured by institutions that want to control us.
It's the idea that the official story is always suspect.
And that the truth might be hidden in the things we dismiss. A child's magic word, a pagan picture on a mummy, a forgotten verse in Amos. Potter invites us to look at the reject pile of history and see if maybe, just maybe, the truth is lying there.
And he leaves us with a really provocative thought about Jesus, too.
He does. He suggests that if you were to meet the figure we know as Jesus, he probably wouldn't introduce himself by that name. Jesus Christ is a title in a Greek translation. Potter suggests his identity is something far more ancient, connected to that I am system, the Yod He Vav He.
And that the God commonly worshipped today, the one demanding wars and tithes, might be the God of this world in a clever disguise.
It forces you to ask, when you pray, who exactly are you talking to? The system or the source?
That is something I think we are all going to be chewing on for a while. Roy Potter's deep dive is definitely not for the faint of heart, but it certainly opens your eyes, or maybe I should say, opens the window.
Opens the hay.
Exactly. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the esoteric. Keep your eyes on the horizon, keep your heart light, and we will see you next time.